Hi folks, hope you are doing well in these strange and difficult times. I hope you are keeping well, keeping safe if you can. Oh, it's a mad world that we are living in. Thank you so much to everyone who came out to Dublin Comic Con last weekend. I was all set up there. It was lovely to meet people again and to see people again. And it was wonderful just hearing how many people, they're particularly kind of folks, kind of mid-teens, early 20s who were coming up going, You saved me in the Leaving Cert, which for anyone outside of Ireland, it's the kind of end of high school exam. And so many people were like, oh my god, I saw your videos when I was in primary school. And I'm like, cool, way to make me feel old. But I suppose I have been making these videos now nearly for 10 years. So there you go. It really made me feel good about what I do and why I do it and how I do it. You know, making these videos available for free for everybody to watch on YouTube. And it's, it's lovely to hear that, oh, they do help. They do help. So you're welcome. And there you go. And of course, if you want to support this channel directly, you can do so at patreon.com/John D Ruddy, where you can get loads of different benefits. And if I reach my next goal of 200 patrons, I will produce a video about the rise of Nazi Germany, which, yeah, there's a lot of history in there. This video has been sponsored by NordVPN, the online VPN service allowing you to be more free and secure in browsing the internet. NordVPN is celebrating its 10th birthday this year, which is very exciting. It has grown so much to have over 5,300 servers spread across 60 countries, making it easier and easier for you to be online without other folks out there harvesting your data. NordVPN's high-speed encrypted system is available across every major platform, including Windows, Android, iOS, Mac OS, and Linux. I love using NordVPN for watching my favorite content while traveling abroad, now that many of us are able to begin doing that again. It's very easy to use, clicking on the location on the map and away you go in seconds. You can find streaming services at lower prices and even access content not usually available in your own region. NordVPN opens up the world to you right here. To celebrate NordVPN's 10th birthday, get the NordVPN 2-year plan plus 1 month free for an exclusive discount at nordvpn.com/John D Ruddy. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. So, there you go. And now onto our John Talks for today. So, this has certainly been a very interesting time to be alive right now, albeit a terrifying one. We've seen one nation disregard the sovereignty of another, one nation rolling over the will of another independent nation and looking for them to bend. Indeed, I could be talking about Russia and Ukraine right now. I could also be talking about ongoing American bombing campaigns of Somalia, or the many other conflicts that continue to rage across the world. In a word, what we are seeing is imperialism, something that has ravaged the world for centuries, and indeed one of the other related terms to this is colonialism, originally setting up colonies of your people in another part of the world and letting that community grow, or as the British and many others began doing, claiming control over a native people and slowly but surely shaping them in their culture, in their mindset to be loyal subjects of the crown, or the empire, or the cross, or whatever brand of control you're using this century. As an Irish person who has spent years now exploring and sharing Irish history, and indeed world history, I see so many parallels between the struggles of the Irish people with people all across the world. In many ways, Ireland was sort of one of England's prototype colonies where they learned all the ins and outs of subjugation. To simplify it down to its bare bones, Ireland and England had different ways of farming, and Ireland's way of farming was seemingly not as efficient as the English way, and there was all this wonderful farmland in Ireland that seemed to be wasted on the Irish. I often liken it to two young kids. You know, one of them has a really cool toy. It's their toy. And the other kid is watching them play with it. And the kid with the toy isn't playing with it the way that the kid without the toy would play with it. You know, why aren't they pressing all the buttons? You know, like, I could do so much cooler things with that toy. I should be able to play with that toy. They don't deserve that toy. I'm gonna take that toy. It's better with me anyway. And then the other kid is left crying without their toy. I mean, it's obviously not a perfect analogy, but you get the idea. Before England started setting up plantations in North America, they established plantations in Ireland. Before they began trudging over countless other cultures, they tried different times to stamp out the Irish language and Irish culture. Some of the ramifications of that are still felt today. My first language is English. And yeah, it's a classic, you know, what have the Romans ever done for us? You know, the English language is very, very useful to have as a first language in this modern world. I am thankful for that. But at the same time, it is a tragedy how much our native language continues to struggle despite many efforts to keep it alive here in Ireland. I look back at the struggle for Indian independence and I see the same horrendous tactics used on Ireland in our struggles in 1916 and the War of Independence, albeit on a much larger scale in India. What I'm getting at here isn't about competition of grievance. It's not about who had it worse, you know? What I'm saying is that as an Irish person with my Irish history, I feel more of a connection to the struggle of native people around the world who have suffered from being colonized than I do with white Europeans living around the world. I don't mean I feel nothing for Europeans elsewhere, you know, but like I know loads of Europeans who live all across the world. I know loads of people, say, who live in North America who have either directly moved there from somewhere else or are descended from people who have historically moved there and colonized there. So, you know, but say when it comes to the history of the countless Native American communities across North America, I feel like I relate more to their story of having a foreign power come to their home, force them off their land, commit countless atrocities towards them, you know, than I can relate to the grand adventure of going and making it in the new world and having a fresh start and moving out west and finding our fortune in the land of opportunity. And indeed, obviously, tons of Irish people made that journey and became part of that story. And I suppose this is what I'm getting at. How can the colonized become the colonizer? It never fails to disappoint me when I see Irish Americans take an anti-immigrant stance. I don't understand it. I mean, yeah, I think I might understand it with some people. But just the contradiction of, well, I came over here from another country, but I don't want anyone else to. You know? I left my own country to make a new start, but I don't want other people leaving their countries and coming here to make a new start. We're the greatest country in the world, built on the backs of those who have come from elsewhere. But I don't want anyone else coming from elsewhere. Of course, this is much more complex than I'm outlining here, with race and religion being big factors in this too. And I'm not advocating the go back to where you came from adage either, because if we were all to take that to its literal sense, we'd all go back to Central Africa, where our species originated. You know, but why stop there? Why not go back to where all primates came from, or go back to where all mammals came from? I know I'm being facetious here, but you know what I mean. It's complicated, okay? As I said before, Ireland has a long past of colonies and plantations. Some of our surnames hint at the layers of people who have come here. Doyles and McLaughlins have Viking origins. Costello and Fitzwilliam, anything with Fitz basically, they're Old Norman names. And indeed, growing up in Ulster, a place with a long 400-year history of plantation, you grow to learn different first names and surnames, and whether or not those people might be Catholic or Protestant, you know. It's kind of a sixth sense in Ulster. Now, I don't mean this in a derogatory way. You might have seen Kenneth Branagh's recent film Belfast, where two kids are actually talking about this. But of course, as they point out in the film, it's not foolproof. But, you know, if someone's O'Donnell, chances are they probably at least grew up Catholic. And if someone is Patterson, they probably at least grew up Protestant. Again, there's no hard and fast rule, but that's what our minds do. Our minds are constantly looking to make quick connections, quick understandings of who people are or who they might be. We can't stop our brains from doing this, but we can become aware of this and avoid acting on what our brain thinks it knows as opposed to what it actually knows. That's how you might do it racism. The first Protestant planters came to Ulster in 1609, and as we know, the Protestant-Catholic divide in Ulster in particular has been delicate, to say the very least, at many times, often resulting in violence and atrocities from both sides. The Troubles in the late 20th century were fought to a stalemate, resulting in the Good Friday Agreement, where people can self-identify as Irish and or British. And if ever the majority of Northern Ireland wish to join the rest of Ireland, the British government will allow this. And if you've seen all of my other videos on this, you've heard that phrase over and over again. Sadly still, some diehards would take the position of, well, if you're British, then go back to Britain. That's not practical, nor is it logical. This has been their home for 400 years. You know, it is how we move forward while reflecting on the past and how we got here, how the past has shaped or affected any current inequalities, and we can hopefully deal with them. Some Northern Ireland folks watching might think, aye, but sure, you live in the south, in Donegal, which is technically further north than most of Northern Ireland, but I'm not going to be technical. But we still share in that history of plantation. Sure, it's not the same, because we're not part of the United Kingdom, but still, there are still Catholic schools and Protestant schools here. Society isn't wholly segregated or anything, but the echoes of history still remain. Of course, the story of the Irish going over to America is a complicated one too. You had some Protestant folks from Ulster, some already leaving the new plantations in Ulster, heading across to the new colonies. They were of WASP descent, so early America didn't mind them too much. Irish Catholics were brought over in the 1650s after Oliver Cromwell conquered Ireland. Many were sent over to the Caribbean sugar plantations as indentured servants. Now, let me be very clear on this right now. Indentured servitude was not the same as chattel slavery. Indentured servants could work off their time for a number of years to eventually become free. Their children were not born into slavery. Chattel slaves from Africa were essentially treated like livestock, and their children would be born into slavery. I make this clear because every so often a post goes around Facebook talking about how Irish slaves were actually treated worse than black slaves, so black people just need to get over it because the Irish did. Oof. We'll get back to that. Also, this image that accompanies this post is cropped from a 19th century painting depicting an ancient Roman slave auction. So Stop using the Irish were slaves too line. It wasn't the same. However, Irish indentured servants certainly did work alongside African enslaved people, and it is reckoned that some of the strong Caribbean twangs in their accent come from Irish accents. Now, if you listen here to this Kerry accent and you hear them talking all about the way the accent lilts across the road and the sound of the bus door stand clear, luggage doors operating, and then you hear some of the various accents coming out of the Caribbean, you can hear a lot of the same sounds, obviously mixed with various African dialects too, but you hear where some of the bounce might have come from. Many Irish people came to America in the mid-19th century in the wake of the horrendous potato famine and the decades of poverty that followed. They were very much on the lower rungs of the social ladder. They were poor. They were Catholic. The Protestant ruling class of America was wary of this new wave of Catholics coming from Europe, from Italy, from Poland, from loads of places. Were their loyalties with America or were they with Rome? Guys, they just wanted to make a living. Of course, the 1860s brought the American Civil War, and many Irish people joined the armed forces. On both sides, depending on where they lived, but mostly for the Union. With the Emancipation Proclamation came millions of free, formerly enslaved people fleeing the South. Industrial centres like New York saw conflict between the Irish and African Americans, both on the lowest rungs of the ladder, struggling for jobs, struggling for a living in the capitalist system. But John, I hear you say, I think you're leaving out a very important colour of the situation. The Irish were white, and so didn't suffer the same dehumanization as black people, or indeed any people of colour. Well, that's not entirely true. Irish people during the 19th century were depicted in popular culture as apes, as large, savage, hairy-knuckled beasts, waving a shillelagh in the air and probably drunk. While phrenologists were classifying the different races very carefully and not so scientifically, categorizing the Africans and the Britons, etc., the Irish were their own breed and thus less desirable. Some of those old stereotypes still work their way into pop culture today, the drunk Irishman still being a very common stereotype. I mean, yes, Ireland does have quite an unhealthy drinking culture, but still, it's not as if we're the only people to have ever gotten drunk. Now, once again, pointing out that deeply racist images akin to minstrels is not a license for people to be like, see, the Irish suffered from racism too, so you have to get over it. There were the infamous signs in England saying no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. But as time went on and society changed, Irish people did have certain privileges that people of colour did not. I'm white and super ginger, so one could assume that the likelihood of me having some Irish or Scottish blood in me is quite high. But at the same time, I could change my accent and even change my name, and I could fit in a little bit more to a white society. I can choose to stick out less. It is part of my white privilege. And as you can see, even though there was a time when Irish were seen as other, indeed Catholics in America were seen as other, now it's more about simply being white and Christian. I do find it funny when some Americans talk about Europe and European culture as if it's a monoculture. And yes, I am well aware that there are many cultural variations across North America. But it seems as if Spain and Sweden were interchangeable. Europeans. As if England and Greece were all the same. You know, that's the kind of thinking that would have Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Seminole, and Choctaw people moved from all over the South and crammed in together in Oklahoma, you know? Yous are all natives. Yous all are alike. Europe, like most places, sadly, has had a long history of different groups establishing their dominance over others. There was a map going around on Twitter, which was, what if Europe was colonized by Europe? And it was Europe, but with big straight line borders. And yes, I get it, the scars of imperialism across the world are often drawn in straight lines. You take that bit, I'll take this bit. What about the people living there? Doesn't matter. So yeah, I get the sentiment of the map, although I would have much fewer territories paying little regard to what we know about cultural or linguistic differences across the continent. However, I responded to this by sharing a map stating that this is what Europe looks like when it is colonized by Europe. And it was a map from 1914, when most of Europe was made up of empires. This is what it looks like when England decides that Scotland, Wales, and Ireland are their territory. This is what it looks like when Austria-Hungary decides that it should control half of the Slavic territories of the Balkans. This is what it looks like when Spain decides that it controls Catalonia. This is what it looks like when Russia decides that it controls Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, Ukraine. This is a map of empires. This is a map of the few controlling the many. And if there was one good thing to come out of World War I, it was the beginning of the collapse of these empires. So, as we watch the invasion of Ukraine being live streamed, in Ireland we can very much relate from a historical perspective. That bigger neighbour who has loomed at your doorstep, who has indeed controlled you in the past. It was such an irony at the beginning of World War I, when Britain stepped in to defend the independence of the smaller nations of Belgium and Luxembourg. No small nation should be bullied by their larger neighbours. Ireland in the corner, like, cool. I think we might go start the Easter Rising then. That's great. You know? Today we see many Western countries denounce Putin's blatant disregard for sovereign borders, while the likes of the United States continues to bomb other sovereign nations across the world. Another brand of imperialism. Empires directly owning other countries went out of fashion after World War II, so America and the CIA just went about violent regime change in the name of liberty and capitalism, including President John F. Kennedy, the first Catholic American president, very proud of his Irish heritage. So many people in America take pride in their Irish heritage, including current President Joe Biden. Irish Americans are a historically oppressed people who have managed to rise above, propped up by their white privilege. Again, white privilege does not mean that your life is easy. It means that your skin color isn't an extra hurdle for you to jump over. And I'm not against people moving to America or anywhere else and making a life for yourself. But denying the plight of many who do not benefit from the same privileges as you is a thing. Acknowledge where you are and what the foundations are built upon. Ireland is not a perfect country. We have a long history of judgment, of shame, of controlling women, direct provision. Ireland's current long-term way of housing asylum seekers leaves a lot to be desired. Discrimination against members of the travelling community in Ireland continues to be quietly accepted. Well, it's their own fault. They have so many problems. Why can't they just settle down and live like we do? Does that kind of thinking sound familiar? There's a phrase going around a lot these days of decolonize your mind, suggesting that our minds have been colonized. And that is true. The colonized mind tends to subconsciously or otherwise favour the colonizer's culture, at least when the colonization is effective. English is my first language. Tagilige ogum ach níl me lifa, agus níl me confident immorelige. Nílas ogum an focal do confident. Yes, of course, English is one of the most common lingua franca of the world, but still, I, along with many of my fellow Irish people, struggle with the Irish language. Now, this is a topic I think I'll cover more on in another video, but suffice it to say that Irish is taught in schools from the age of 4, roughly, till the age of about 18, and most people still struggle with it. It's a very different language, a very different sounding language to English. It has a lot of harsher sounds to it. But even that, it's harsher. That's a word that's not a million miles away from barbaric, rough, uncivilized. We have a love-hate relationship with the Irish language here in Ireland. We're proud of it as part of our nation, our national identity, and yet so many of us carry a silent shame in not being able to speak it better. A silent shame that despite our achievement of independence from Britain, for most of the island anyway, our tongue continues to be colonized. Most of our place names in Ireland are crude anglicizations of the old Irish names. Donegal doesn't mean anything. Belfast doesn't mean anything. Dublin doesn't mean anything. Dúnanal means Fort of the Foreigners. Béal Fairste means the mouth of the River Farset, and indeed Farshid means sandbar. Dublin, or well, Dúlin, as we're saying in Donegal, but Dublin means black pool, and no, not that black pool, but the black pool of the River Potiel, which acted as a natural moat to Dublin Castle. Thousands of place names twisted to suit the English language. We use the English place names more because the Irish ones are too hard to pronounce. We support more English football teams than we do Irish ones. Oh, but sure, they have better teams over there. Die-hard Sinn Féin supporters will be die-hard Liverpool supporters. I just don't get that. So many Irish people love to watch English soap operas and TV shows and then complain that Irish TV shows are so cheap and rubbish. There's a sizable amount of people, myself included, who have a bizarre fascination with the British royal family. I'm doing like a 7 or 10 part thing about the monarchs of England. Despite our independence, Ireland has had a tendency to follow in Britain's footsteps from time to time. Thankfully, that seems to be lessening. Brexit. But still, and again, this is not an anti-British thing that I'm getting at. Enjoy Coronation Street, enjoy EastEnders. I devoured Downton Abbey last year. But it's that simultaneous dissing of your own culture, of wishing we had it better and that we were somehow inferior, A voice cries in the distance, would Ireland not be better off than the United Kingdom? Even the name the British Isles, which continues to be used by many to describe the islands of Great Britain and Ireland, it suggests that Ireland is by default British, which it's not. Some people are like, but that's what they're called. Yeah, and who called it that? Maps can change, right? Geographical labels can change. People draw the borders. People label the maps. People can redraw borders and relabel maps. The question is, who has the power and authority to do that, and should that be challenged? Of course, there are alternatives to the British Isles, such as simply Britain and Ireland, or the Atlantic Archipelago, which I love, and it sounds very fancy and also harkens back to our older, deeper Stone Age connections of an Atlantic people. It saddens me to see people coming out on St. Patrick's Day proud to be Irish, but also are unable to acknowledge the struggle of refugees. St. Patrick himself was dragged to Ireland as a slave at first. When you raise a glass to Ireland, raise a glass to those who continue to be forced off their own land, a la to hell or to Connacht. Think of those who flee their countries because of famine and dire living conditions, looking for the new start in a land of opportunity. Think of the native people who remain of North America, surrounded by a country that is undeniably built on the blood and bones of generations of their own communities. It's the same slow chokehold Israel has Palestine in today. It's still happening. Ireland isn't just the green fields that you romanticize about. It's the country that decided by referendum in 2015 that same-sex couples can get married. It decided by referendum in 2018 that women should have access to the healthcare that they need. When we remember St. Patrick, remember, he was a foreigner with a foreign religion who came to a new land. Just saying. Thank you very much for watching, folks, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Yes, I hope you all have a great time. If you wish to support this channel, you can do so at patreon.com/John D Ruddy. And you can also get loads of Maniman merchandise at johndruddy.com. Just as a brief update, Monarchs of England Part 3 has currently been put on hold for a much more important project. More details on that to come. You can probably take a guess. But yes, so that is a thing. So for now, I am going to get cracking, get working, and yes, I will see you soon. Ba-bum.